Nothing in this recording is intended as investment advice, and the people in this recording may hold positions in the companies they talk about. Do not make any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Hello and welcome to Zak's Traders Cafe. Today I'm joined by Anthony Tennyson, who's CEO and Executive Director, and by Professor David Nutt, who is CSO, which is Chief Scientific Officer, I presume. How are you today, gents?
I'm very good, thank you, Zach.
All right, it's always good to have a professor on, but we'll start off with Anthony, just to tell us a little bit of background on Solvonis. It used to be Graph Polymer, and what you're doing at the moment, what you're trying to achieve.
So Zach, listen, it's a pleasure to get the opportunity to speak with you and your audience today. So I'm lucky enough to be the chief executive of Solvonis Therapeutics, PLC, which is a UK incorporated LSE listed biotechnology company. And what we are seeking to do is we are seeking to treat more effectively two of the biggest issues facing the public, facing the global healthcare system today, which is mental health and addiction. Unfortunately, up to 40% of people, certainly in the US, at some stage during their life will be affected by a mental health issue or addiction. The current standard of care is very inadequate for the treatment of those conditions. There's been very, very limited innovation in that field for really over the last 20 or 30 years. And that's just not good enough. So what we're doing is we are seeking to develop innovative medicines to more effectively treat those conditions, starting off with alcohol use disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, Zach, unfortunately for alcohol use disorder, there's probably very few of us whose lives haven't been touched by alcohol use disorder. It's a terrible, terrible disease. The current standard of care for that disease is inadequate, as I mentioned before. 75% of people who suffer with alcohol use disorder will relapse within the first 12 months post-treatment. And very often, many people go back to drinking more after they've relapsed than before. And this disease, it affects 29 million people in the US and another 11 million people across the UK and the big four EU economies. And despite the disease affecting this many people, unfortunately only 10% of people who suffer with this disease seek treatment. And that often results in this disease destroying lives, destroying families, and ultimately, unfortunately, resulting in death. And that's just not good enough. And so with the science that we have that's been spearheaded by Professor David Nutt, we're seeking to develop much more effective and innovative medicines to treat this disease, to provide hope for the individuals, families and communities who are being poorly served by the pharma industry as it currently stands. And in our opinion and our firm belief, that's not good enough and that needs to change.
I think just as a general point, a lot of companies, I suppose they're called, they're sort of orphan, they go for sort of orphan drugs. So they're focusing on very specialist, very obscure ailments, which nobody's really heard of and very small addressable market. You, as a company, seem to be going for the big stuff that affects most people, and therefore that is a difference. It's a massive addressable market, massive need, and presumably commercially a massive opportunity there as well.
Indeed, you've hit a nail on the head there for what sets us apart, Zach, from other biotech companies of our size. It's relatively easier from a regulatory perspective to pursue an indication that affects relatively few people, because you can secure orphan designation, certainly in the US, and the regulatory pathway is slightly more efficient. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to seek to solve large issues affecting many millions of people, where the pharma industry has failed to innovate over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think what's really important is if we want to look at comparators or examples of why are we doing this. Your audience may be familiar with the GLP-1s, that's Ozempic, currently massive blockbuster drugs for the treatment of obesity. Those drugs were well understood and they weren't necessarily innovative. They've been well understood and tried and tested with diabetes. And in fact, Pfizer turned them away. And then it was up to Ozempic, took them forward. And really, up until maybe 7.5, 5 years ago, for the pharma industry, obesity wasn't necessarily something they were very interested in because it was hard to treat. And then on the GLP-1s came along, and Ozempic, they are forecast, or Ozempic is forecast to be the largest single selling drug in history. And it has moved Novo Nordisk from being a mid-tier player to at least one stage recently being the largest company in Europe by market capitalization. So there is a significant commercial opportunity, there's a significant shareholder value creation opportunity, and there's a massive addressable market to be addressed in seeking to develop medicines to more effectively treat these large chronic problems.
So it's probably time to speak to the Professor, David Nutt. Obviously, the areas you've chosen, everyone would want to have a win in those areas. Do you have an angle, and do you have the science and the know-how to deliver it?
Yeah, we're approaching it from a very different direction to previously. Up till now, treatments for alcoholism have largely focused on targeting a particular receptor in the brain, like the opiate receptor or the glutamate receptor. Those are drugs like naltrexone or acamprosate. We take a different perspective. We disrupt the circuits of the brain which underpin and perpetuate addiction. And we do that in two ways. The most advanced program is the program relating to the use of ketamine and S-ketamine, which, as you may have heard of, is an anesthetic, but turns out to be a very powerful mechanism for changing the way the brain works. And we've shown, and others have shown, that it can powerfully disrupt disorders like alcoholism and also depression. So we've got a lot of data there of its safe use in mental illness. We're moving that into addiction. But we're also looking at developing new molecules to deal with another major issue that Anthony raised, which is trauma. And trauma is not only a big problem in relation to mental illness, but is also one of the other drivers for alcoholism. In fact, I did a study a few years ago, which Solvonis now own the data on, showing you could use MDMA, which is a PTSD treatment, to alleviate and significantly reduce relapse to drinking in alcoholics, because so many alcoholics drink because they've got trauma. So we've got two very novel approaches.
And Zak, if I could just add there that what sets us apart from other biotechnology companies, certainly of our market cap, is the fact that we have our lead program is now in phase 3, which for your audience is the final hurdle that a biotechnology company has to go through prior to applying for approval from the authorities in a particular jurisdiction to be able to commercialize their drug. The phase 2, so that's our lead program, SVN001, which is aiming to treat severe alcohol use disorder. And from a validation perspective, the trial is co-funded by the UK Department of Health and Social Care through the National Institute of Health and Care Research and ourselves in Solvonis. It's being delivered in the UK public healthcare system, so the NHS, and 60% of the key opinion leaders in the UK NHS alcohol addiction treatment space are involved one way or another in the trial. And people coming onto that trial, Zak, and this is really, really important when I talk about providing hope for the families and the individuals who are currently being poorly served by the pharma industry for the treatment of alcohol use disorder. People coming onto the trial were sober or abstinent 2% of the time. So that means they were sober 7 days a year, Zak. Those that went through the active arm of the trial achieved on average 86% sobriety in the 6 months post-treatment. So that was in a phase 2 trial. The results of that phase 2 trial were so strong that now the UK public healthcare system and the UK Department of Health are co-funding the phase 3 trial for SVN001. And just per David's point, that is an incredibly strong validation for the innovative science that we're bringing to bear to solve this very, very large problem. And therefore, again, bring it back to the examples or the comparator of the GLP-1s, there is a significant commercial opportunity and an opportunity for shareholder value creation when companies are successful in innovating in treating large disease classes that affect many millions of people, and particularly where there's been a significant lack of innovation by the pharma industry over the last decades.
So you've got two big potential blockbuster situations, which is obviously more than just what Novo Nordisk has. So it's known for being the weight loss jab company. Do you have the potential? I mean, the market cap is only 13 million at the moment. Is the potential in the billions for your company if you get these treatments over the line?
Well, so what we've got, I think, for a company like ours, the real opportunity, the commercial opportunity, and the value creation opportunity really lies in the US. And when we look at the alcohol addiction treatment market in the US, there are 15,000 clinics, Zach, in the US treating people with alcohol use disorder. And there's direct costs to the UK, or I beg your pardon, the US health insurance system, so Medicare, Medicaid, and private payers, of about $25 to $35 billion a year. And 29 million people in the US suffer with alcohol use disorder. So that's where there's a massive, or I beg your pardon, a significant commercial opportunity for us. And we have another program, SVN002, where we're specifically targeting the US market. So if we are successful, I would see that there is obviously an opportunity for the value of the company to be significantly higher than it is today if we are successful in progressing our research forward across those two alcohol use disorder programs. And then, like you said, we've got more than one shot on goal. We're not a one-trick pony. We've got other programs at an earlier stage for PTSD. So I'm loath to put a value on what I think the company could be worth. But when you look at the US, there's a drug in market in the US. It's called Vivitrol. They charge between $1,500 and $2,000 a month for a monthly injection, and it's usually about 12 to 24 months. So that kind of gives you an idea of the unit price that maybe could be possible to earn in the US, and even with the relatively low market penetration in the US for a product like the 002 product, there is a big opportunity there, certainly in our opinion.
And it seems that with a 30 million market cap, the market is behaving as if you've only just started getting involved in these two areas, but you're not at sort of phase 3, or you just literally just at sort of square one. So are you conscious of that as well? That there's no real sizzle, no real premium in the valuation of the company, given the potential you have and also what you've already achieved?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there is a certain, in our opinion, a dislocation between the potential and the current value and within the company and how the markets are valuing us. But some of that, though, is due to our relative newness of the relative newness of the Solvonis brand with UK investors. Most of the IP and most of the value and most of the research in the company has come through our recently completed acquisition of a Canadian biotech called Awaken Life Sciences. And we only completed that transaction probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we are now really getting an opportunity to introduce Solvonis as a relatively new company to UK investors. And so that will take a bit of time. But I think what's really interesting for your audience to understand is when Awaken's peak valuation on the Canadian markets was 80 million Canadian. That's in and around 45 million sterling. And that was a number of years ago, and the Canadian markets challenged, etc. So valuations came off. But a lot of progress has been made within Awaken on progressing the research, significant capital put in since that peak valuation. So I think there's a couple of reasons as to why we're sitting where we are. One is the brand is new, the name is new, the story is new to the UK markets. The acquisition where we brought all this really, really interesting science and team like David in, it is relatively new. But I think what people can look at with a certain level of comfort is to where Awaken's peak valuation was. And there certainly is some headroom for the company to grow into in the near term.
Well, I hope that after this interview, one or two people will awaken to your prospects, so to speak. But in the meantime, Anthony Tennyson, CEO, and Professor David Nutt, CSO at Solvonis, thank you very much indeed.
Zach, thank you very much.
Thank you.